6 months after the broadcast, the Galactic Council ceased to exist. It didn't end with a climactic battle or dramatic surrender. Instead, it died the way most empires do, slowly, then all at once, as the systems that held it together simply stopped functioning. Constantine stood in what had once been the Council's primary command center, now repurposed as the coordination hub for humanity's new galactic administration. The crystalline architecture remained unchanged, but the beings who worked at the control stations were all human. They moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had spent years preparing for this moment. "Final status report," he requested. Nemesis consulted her displays, though they both knew the numbers by heart. Complete political collapse achieved across 47 Council worlds. 18 species have formally petitioned for inclusion in the Human Alliance. 23 more have declared neutrality and requested non-interference treaties. The remaining 6 are no longer a concern. Constantine nodded. Those final 6 species had been the ones who had actively participated in planning the children's execution. They had discovered that humanity's concept of justice was both more patient and more thorough than they had anticipated. The Vrek's homeworld of Kitness was now a nature preserve, its hive cities empty and overgrown with earth vegetation. The species itself hadn't been eliminated. That would have been crude, the kind of blunt instrument approach that less sophisticated civilizations might have used. Instead, the Vreks had been relocated to a carefully prepared habitat world where they could pursue their collective lifestyle without the ability to threaten others. They were essentially pets now, maintained in comfort, but with no agency over their own future. The process had been repeated with each of the species that had voted for the executions. None had been destroyed, but all had been rendered permanently irrelevant to galactic politics. It was a level of strategic thinking that the Council had never anticipated from the primitive humans. But the real transformation went much deeper than simple conquest. Humanity had done something that the Council, for all its centuries of dominance, had never achieved. They had created a truly unified galactic civilization. Admiral Rodriguez, now bearing the title of Director of Galactic Security, reviewed the reports from across human space. The colonies that the Council had demanded be evacuated were now thriving metropolises. The Outer Rim settlements had become major industrial centers. Most importantly, the dozens of species that had been oppressed or marginalized under Council rule were now active participants in a growing interstellar democracy. "It's remarkable," she mused to her aide, a young Saurian officer who had defected during the early stages of the war. "The Council had 3 centuries to build something like this, and they never even tried." Lieutenant Kesh flicked her tongue thoughtfully. "With respect, Director, I think they did try. But they tried to rule through fear and technological superiority. Humans rule through, what is your word, inspiration?" Rodriguez smiled. The young Saurian had grasped something that the Council's leadership never had. True power didn't come from the ability to destroy, but from the ability to create. Humanity had won the war not just by demonstrating superior military capabilities, but by offering something better than what they were replacing. The transformation hadn't been without cost. Earth itself bore the scars of the Council's final, desperate attempt at retaliation. When it became clear that their civilization was collapsing, the remaining Council forces had launched a massive assault on humanity's homeworld, hoping to decapitate the human leadership and break their opponent's will to continue fighting. Dr. Sarah Chen walked through the rebuilt districts of Neo-Tokyo. Her daughter Maya, now a young woman studying xenobiology at the new Galactic University. The city showed no signs of the devastation that had been wrought 6 months ago, but Sarah remembered every moment of the siege. The Council's attack had been everything they could have hoped for. Overwhelming force applied with precision timing to achieve maximum psychological impact. Their fleets had darkened Earth's skies. Their bombardment had reduced major cities to rubble. Their ground forces had seemed poised to achieve total victory. What they hadn't anticipated was that humanity's response to existential threat wasn't fear or surrender, but a cold, methodical rage that would have impressed their most violent ancestors. Marcus Chen, now serving as Director of Planetary Defense, had been on the surface during the worst of the fighting. He still remembered the moment when the tide turned, when humanity stopped reacting to the Council's assault and began dictating the terms of engagement. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Maya Chen, then barely 18 years old and working as a communications specialist with the Defense Forces. She had been monitoring Council tactical frequencies when she noticed something odd about their command protocols. "Dad," she had said, her voice cutting through the chaos of the command bunker, "I think I know how to beat them." The Council's greatest strength had also been their greatest weakness. Their multi-species alliance required constant coordination between forces that thought in fundamentally different ways. The Vrex operated as a collective, making decisions through consensus. The Saurians followed rigid hierarchical structures. The Ethereals processed information in quantum superpositions that allowed for multiple simultaneous strategies. Maya had realized that this complexity could be turned against them. By introducing carefully crafted false signals into their communication network, she could create contradictory orders that would seem legitimate to each species, but would result in catastrophic coordination failures. The effect had been immediate and devastating. Council forces found themselves firing on their own allies as contradictory targeting data led different species to identify the same ships as both friendly and hostile. Ground troops received orders to advance and retreat simultaneously, creating chaos in their formations. Even their command structure began to break down as different species received conflicting information about human capabilities and intentions. Within hours, the unstoppable Council Armada had become a collection of confused, isolated units fighting not just humanity, but each other. The psychological impact had been shattering. The Council's carefully maintained image of technological superiority had crumbled in the face of a tactic that used their own complexity against them. But the real masterstroke had come from Constantine's network. As the Council forces struggled with their compromised communications, human operatives throughout their fleet had activated the final phase of a plan decades in the making. Every major Council ship had been infiltrated years ago by maintenance crews, diplomatic staff, and cultural exchange participants. They had planted devices that appeared to be routine equipment upgrades, but were actually sophisticated sabotage systems waiting for activation. When the signal came, the Council's most advanced warships simply stopped working. Engines went dead, weapons systems locked out, life support began failing, even their escape pods had been compromised. Within minutes, the invasion fleet had become a collection of helpless hulks drifting in Earth's orbit, their crews dependent on human rescue vessels for survival. The sight of Council admirals and generals being escorted off their disabled ships by human marines had been broadcast across the galaxy. The message was unmistakable. Humanity didn't just defeat their enemies, they made them irrelevant. Now, 6 months later, those same Council officers were working as advisors and consultants in the new galactic government, their expertise valued, but their authority permanently transferred to human leadership. It was a transformation that spoke to humanity's fundamental approach to warfare. They didn't just win, they converted their enemies into assets. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity itself. The species that had been dismissed as aggressive primitives had proven themselves to be the galaxy's most sophisticated civilization. They had demonstrated capabilities that established powers hadn't even imagined possible, and done so with a level of strategic patience that spanned generations. Constantine's final report to the new Galactic Council reflected this transformation. The man who had spent his career in the shadows was now serving as Director of Intelligence for a government that ruled not through fear, but through demonstrated competence. "The transition is complete," he reported to the assembled representatives of 63 species. "The old council's infrastructure has been fully integrated into our systems. Trade routes have been reopened. Refugee populations have been resettled. Most importantly, we have established the framework for a sustainable galactic civilization." The new council chamber was a study in contrasts with its predecessor. Where the old council had been dominated by the representatives of a few powerful species, the new assembly included beings from dozens of worlds, many of which had never been permitted to participate in galactic governance. The aquatic collective, whose water-breathing physiology had made them second-class citizens under the old regime, now served as directors of oceanic world development. The silicon-based lithoids, long dismissed as too slow-thinking for important decisions, had become the backbone of the new government's long-term planning division. Human representatives were present, but they didn't dominate the proceedings. Instead, they served as facilitators and coordinators, using their demonstrated capabilities to ensure that all voices were heard and all needs were addressed. It was a level of governmental sophistication that the galaxy had never seen before. Ambassador Jennifer Morrison, the same Jenny Morrison who had defied the council in her final moments, stood to address the assembly. At 25, she had become humanity's youngest diplomatic representative. Her appointment a deliberate reminder of why the war had been necessary. "6 months ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems, "this galaxy was ruled by fear. Species were classified as superior or inferior based on their technology and military power. Entire civilizations were denied representation because they didn't fit the Council's narrow definition of acceptability." She paused, looking around the chamber at beings who represented every conceivable form of life. "Today, we gather not as conquerors and conquered, but as partners in building something that has never existed before, a truly inclusive galactic civilization." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together on joint projects. Technology was being shared freely rather than hoarded by the powerful. Most importantly, the resources that had once been devoted to maintaining the Council's dominance were now being used to explore new frontiers and expand the galaxy's understanding of itself. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity's own approach to expansion. Where they had once been forced to colonize worlds in secret, hiding from Council surveillance, they now led openly cooperative missions that included representatives from dozens of species. Dr. Elizabeth Singh, now serving as Director of Galactic Exploration, stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus as it approached an uncharted system at the galaxy's edge. Her crew included beings from 15 different species, each contributing their unique perspectives and capabilities to the mission. "Readings are consistent with habitable worlds," reported her science officer, a being whose crystalline structure allowed for processing data in ways that organic minds couldn't match. "Multiple planets showing signs of potential life." Singh nodded, but her attention was focused on a different kind of reading. The ship's cultural analysis systems, a human innovation that the Council had never developed, were detecting signals that suggested the presence of intelligent life. A young civilization that was just beginning to reach beyond their homeworld. "Standard protocols," she ordered. "Non-interference monitoring until we can assess their development level. If they're ready for contact, we approach as friends and equals. If not, we establish protective protocols to ensure their natural development isn't disrupted." It was an approach that the old Council would never have considered. They had viewed new civilizations as potential threats to be contained or resources to be exploited. Humanity saw them as future partners in the ongoing project of galactic civilization. As the Prometheus began its careful observation of the new species, Singh reflected on how much had changed since that terrible broadcast 6 months ago. The children who had died hadn't lived to see the galaxy their sacrifice had made possible, but their memory had become the foundation of everything humanity had built since. The galaxy had learned that humanity was dangerous when cornered, patient when planning, and ruthless when protecting what they valued. But perhaps more importantly, they had learned that humans were capable of building something better than what they had replaced. The war had been won not through superior firepower or technological dominance, but through a fundamental understanding that true strength came from unity rather than dominance, from inclusion rather than exclusion, from hope rather than fear. As reports came in from across human space, the scope of the transformation became clear. Trade was flourishing between species that had barely acknowledged each other's existence under the Council. Scientific advancement was accelerating as different forms of intelligence collaborated on previously impossible projects. Most importantly, a generation of young beings was growing up in a galaxy where cooperation was the norm rather than the exception. The Galactic Council's execution of human children had been intended as a demonstration of power, a message that resistance was futile. Instead, it had become the catalyst for the most significant transformation in galactic history. Humanity had answered with more than John Wick-style revenge. They had answered with a better future, built on the ashes of the old order and dedicated to ensuring that no civilization would ever again face the choice between submission and extinction. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly what those 23 children had died for. Not just the survival of humanity, but the birth of something greater than any single species could achieve alone. In the end, the Council had been right about one thing. The broadcast had indeed taught the galaxy a lesson. Just not the one they had intended to teach. 71 hours and 37 minutes after the broadcast, the first Council ship exploded. The VCS Harmony, a Zephyrian diplomatic vessel carrying Ambassador Kethvar himself back to the Council homeworld, simply ceased to exist in a brilliant flash of light visible from 3 star systems away. The explosion was so complete that it took the Council's investigation teams 6 hours to even confirm that a ship had been destroyed rather than suffering some kind of navigation error. Kethvar's death sent shockwaves through the Council chambers. The ambassador who had orchestrated humanity's humiliation was gone, along with his entire diplomatic staff and the ship's crew of 43 beings. The message was unmistakable. The 72-hour ultimatum worked both ways. On Centauri Prime, the capital world of humanity's largest colonial cluster, Governor Rebecca Morrison stood before the Emergency Assembly of Colonial Representatives. She had aged a decade in the 3 days since watching her daughter die on live broadcast, but her voice remained steady as she addressed the packed chamber. The Council expects us to abandon our homes, our lives, our future, because they have demonstrated their willingness to murder children, she said. I have one question for each of you. Are you going to let Jenny's death mean nothing? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every colonial world, every mining station, every research outpost voted to resist. The evacuation ships that had been hastily dispatched from Earth were turned away at docking bays by civilians who had decided that some things were worth dying for. But resistance was only half of humanity's response. The other half was being coordinated from locations that didn't appear on any official charts, by people who didn't exist in any government database. Constantine stood in the command center of a facility that had been hollowed out of an asteroid in the void between systems. Banks of monitors showed the positions of every Council vessel within 50 light-years of human space. His operatives had spent years mapping Council supply routes, identifying key personnel, cataloging the weaknesses of species who had grown soft from centuries of unchallenged dominance. Status report, he requested. Nemesis consulted her displays. Phase 1 is complete. Kethvar's elimination has been confirmed. Council response is exactly as predicted. They're pulling their diplomatic personnel back from human space and reinforcing their military assets. And our assets? Fully deployed. Every major council world now has at least a dozen operatives in place. Deep cover agents have been activated after years of dormancy. Financial networks are being liquidated to fund operations. We estimate 36 hours before they realize the scope of what we've put in motion. Constantine nodded. The plan had been years in the making, a contingency that he had hoped would never be necessary. But the Council had forced his hand, and now they would learn why humanity had earned the reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species. The second wave of attacks began 18 hours later. Council shipping lanes that had been secure for decades suddenly became killing fields. Merchant vessels carrying rare minerals from the outer rim vanished without a trace. Passenger liners found their navigation systems corrupted, sending them into asteroid fields where they were torn apart by impacts that should have been impossible to miss. Communication relays that had operated flawlessly for centuries began broadcasting nothing but static. On the Vrek's homeworld of Chitinus, Queen Mother Zekai was in the middle of addressing her brood council when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in moments later, but the damage was done. The planet's primary power grid, which had been considered absolutely secure, had been taken down by a simple computer virus that had apparently been dormant in their systems for months. "How is this possible?" the Queen Mother demanded of her chief technician, a drone whose mandibles clicked nervously as he reviewed the diagnostic reports. "The virus appears to have been inserted during routine maintenance procedures," he reported. "But that was performed by certified council technicians using approved protocols. There should have been no way for human sabotage to penetrate our security." What the Vrex didn't know was that those certified council technicians had included 3 humans who had spent 5 years establishing their cover identities. The virus they had planted was just the beginning. Embedded throughout the Vrex technology infrastructure were dozens of similar surprises, waiting for activation codes that had been transmitted the moment the children died. Similar scenarios were playing out across council space. On the gas giant refineries of the Ethereal Consortium, processing equipment began producing toxic compounds instead of the exotic gases that powered their civilization. Saurian military installations found their weapon systems locked out by security protocols that shouldn't have existed. Even the Council's capital world discovered that their water purification systems had been compromised, forcing millions of beings to rely on emergency rations. The Council's response was swift and predictable. They blamed human terrorists and demanded immediate surrender of the responsible parties. They issued ultimatums, threatened retaliation, and began mobilizing their fleets for a punitive expedition against human space. But Constantine had anticipated this too. Admiral Veltar of the Council's primary battle fleet was reviewing invasion plans when his flagship, the CSS Dominance, suddenly found itself surrounded by human vessels that hadn't been there moments before. The human stealth technology was supposedly inferior to Council systems, but somehow an entire strike force had appeared within weapons range without triggering a single alarm. "This is Admiral Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Force," came the transmission from the lead human vessel. "You have 1 minute to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Failure to comply will result in the immediate destruction of your fleet." Veltar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. "You are outnumbered 5 to 1, human. Your ships are technologically inferior. You cannot seriously expect us to surrender." "Admiral," Rodriguez replied, and Veltar could hear something cold and implacable in her voice. "You killed our children. Numbers are irrelevant now." The human ships opened fire simultaneously, but not with the energy weapons that the Council expected. Instead, they launched what appeared to be simple kinetic projectiles. Chunks of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The Council's energy shields, designed to deflect lasers and plasma bolts, were completely ineffective against solid matter moving at relativistic velocities. 3 Council ships were destroyed in the first salvo. The remaining vessels found their weapon systems inexplicably offline, their engines unresponsive. Boarding pods launched from the human ships, carrying Marines who moved with a precision and ruthlessness that spoke of extensive preparation. Veltar was dragged from his command chair by humans whose faces showed no emotion, no mercy, no hesitation. As he was forced to watch, his entire crew was systematically rounded up and secured. The admiral, who had planned to glass human worlds, found himself a prisoner aboard his own flagship. "Your ships will not be destroyed," Rodriguez informed him over the comm system. "Your crews will not be harmed, but your fleet is now under human control. I suggest you use your remaining communication time to inform the Council that their numerical advantage has just become irrelevant." Similar scenes were being repeated throughout Council space, human strike forces, using ships that shouldn't have existed and tactics that defied military convention, were systematically dismantling Council naval assets. They didn't target civilian populations or infrastructure. Instead, they surgically removed the Council's ability to project force while leaving their victims alive to spread word of humanity's capabilities. The truth was beginning to dawn on the Council leadership. Humanity's primitive technology included innovations that their more established civilizations had never considered: kinetic weapons that bypassed energy shields, computer viruses that exploited backdoors in systems that had been considered secure. Most importantly, a strategic mindset that viewed the impossible as merely challenging. But the real revelation was still to come. In the depths of space, between the stars where no civilized being would think to look, massive structures were beginning to move. Generation ships that the Council had assumed were humanity's desperate attempt at evacuation were revealing their true purpose. Each vessel, large enough to house millions of beings, was not a refugee transport, but a mobile fortress bristling with weapons that defied classification. Dr. Elizabeth Singh, aboard the UES Prometheus, watched as her ship's true capabilities came online. The vessel had been disguised as a civilian evacuation ship, complete with fake refugees and convincing distress signals. In reality, it was humanity's most advanced warship, equipped with experimental technologies that pushed the boundaries of known physics. "All systems green," reported her tactical officer. "Mass driver arrays are charged and ready. Quantum disruptors are standing by. Temporal displacement field is stable." Singh nodded grimly. The Council had wanted to see humanity's true capabilities. They were about to get their wish. "Target the Council's primary communication array," she ordered. "Let's make sure they understand that we're not just fighting back. We're rewriting the rules of engagement." The Prometheus fired its main weapon, a device that the Council's scientists would have dismissed as impossible. The beam didn't just destroy its target, it removed it from existence so completely that the space it had occupied collapsed in on itself, creating a miniature singularity that would serve as a permanent reminder of humanity's displeasure. Across Council space, similar demonstrations were taking place. Human weapons were destroying targets not just in the present, but retroactively. Council installations were ceasing to have ever existed. Supply convoys found themselves transported to random coordinates light years from their intended destinations. Communication networks discovered that their messages were being delivered to the wrong recipients, creating chaos throughout the Council's command structure. But perhaps the most chilling development was the appearance of human operatives who seemed to know details about Council activities that should have been impossible to obtain. In the secure chambers of the Council headquarters, emergency sessions were being held to address the crisis. "How are they doing this?" demanded the ethereal representative, her gaseous form pulsing with agitation. "Our security protocols are absolute. No human agent could have penetrated our deepest facilities." "Perhaps," suggested the Saurian delegate, his forked tongue tasting the air nervously, "we have underestimated their capabilities." the truth was even more disturbing than they suspected. Constantine's network hadn't just planted operatives throughout Council space. They had been doing so for decades. Every major Council species had been infiltrated at the highest levels by humans who had undergone genetic modification to appear as members of their target species. The Vrek's hive mind thought it was immune to infiltration, but they hadn't accounted for humans who had been surgically modified to pass as drones and had spent years learning to mimic their collective thinking patterns. The ethereal consortium believed their gaseous forms were impossible to duplicate. But human technology had developed biomechanical suits that could pass even close examination. Even the telepathic Mindari had been infiltrated by humans who had learned to shield their thoughts so completely that they appeared to be another species entirely. As the reports of sabotage and military defeats poured in, the Council faced a terrible realization. Humanity hadn't just been expanding rapidly across the galaxy. They had been preparing for this war for generations. Every diplomatic mission, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange had been an opportunity to place assets and gather intelligence. The species that the Council had dismissed as aggressive but primitive had been playing a game on a level that the galaxy's established powers couldn't even comprehend. They had turned the Council's own size and bureaucracy against them, using their opponents' confidence in their superior technology to blind them to more subtle forms of warfare. But Constantine's masterstroke was yet to come. In a nondescript office building on a Council world that had never seen human visitors, a being that appeared to be a mid-level Zephyrian bureaucrat activated a communication device that had been waiting dormant for 15 years. Within minutes, every major news network in Council space was broadcasting the same signal. The footage showed not just the execution of the human children, but the planning sessions that had led up to it. Council members discussing how the murders would send a message to humanity. Kethvar himself explaining how killing children would be more effective than targeting adults because it would break their spirit completely. Most damning of all was footage of Council representatives from supposedly peaceful species arguing for even more brutal measures. The holographic recordings showed them laughing about human weakness, dismissing their emotional attachments to their offspring as an exploitable vulnerability. The broadcasts spread across Council space like wildfire, causing massive civil unrest as billions of beings realized that their government had not just committed an atrocity, but had planned it as a calculated act of terrorism. Protests erupted on dozens of worlds. Several species withdrew their representatives from the Council entirely. The moral authority that had allowed the Council to maintain order for centuries collapsed overnight. As chaos engulfed Council space, Constantine allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The first phase of humanity's response was complete. They had demonstrated that human military capabilities had been drastically underestimated. They had shown that human intelligence networks had penetrated every level of Council society. Most importantly, they had destroyed the political unity that was the Council's greatest strength. But this was still just the beginning. The Council had started this war by targeting children. They would learn that humanity's concept of proportional response was very different from their own. The real war was about to begin. The holographic display flickered to life across every inhabited world in the galaxy, casting its cold blue light into homes, workplaces, and public squares. Children paused their games. Workers stopped mid-conversation. Even the most jaded politicians and traders turned their attention to the emergency broadcast emanating from the Galactic Council's primary transmission array. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Collective stood at the center of the ornate chamber, his crystalline features reflecting the harsh lighting. Behind him, arranged in a perfect semicircle, sat the representatives of 47 species that comprised the Galactic Council. Each alien face bore the same expression of righteous determination. "Citizens of the galaxy," Kethvar began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had governed interstellar politics for over 3 centuries. Today marks a turning point in our shared history. For too long, we have tolerated the aggressive expansion of a primitive species that calls itself humanity. The camera slowly panned across the assembled council members. The insectoid Vrex clicked their mandibles in approval. The gaseous ethereals pulsed with satisfied luminescence. The reptilian saurians flicked their forked tongues in anticipation. These humans, Kethvar continued, have violated every principle of civilized expansion. They terraform worlds without regard for existing ecosystems. They establish colonies in disputed territories. They refuse to acknowledge the sovereignty of established civilizations. Most heinously, they have repeatedly ignored our directives to cease their reckless proliferation across the galaxy. On Earth, in a modest apartment in Neo-Tokyo, Dr. Sarah Chen clutched her daughter Maya closer as the words echoed through their living room. Her husband Marcus had been deployed with the Terran Defense Fleet to the Proxima system, where tensions with the Galactic Council had been escalating for months. Now, watching the alien ambassador's cold declaration, Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. However, Kethvar raised one crystalline hand. We are not without mercy. We understand that these humans are young, impulsive. Perhaps they simply need to learn the consequences of their actions in terms they can comprehend. The camera shifted to show a secondary chamber, and gasps echoed across 1,000 human worlds. 23 children, ranging in age from 8 to 16, stood in a transparent containment field. They wore the simple clothes they had been taken in: school uniforms, play clothes, casual wear. Their faces showed confusion and fear, but also a defiant spark that was unmistakably human. Sarah recognized some of them from the news reports. Jenny Morrison, the 12-year-old daughter of the Martian colonial governor. Tom Bradley, whose father commanded the asteroid mining operations in the belt. Lisa Zhang, daughter of the chief terraforming engineer on Kepler 442b. Each child represented a key figure in humanity's expansion efforts. These young humans were taken during routine diplomatic exchanges, Kethvar explained with clinical detachment. Their parents are among the primary architects of humanity's aggressive expansion policy. Today, they will witness the price of their arrogance. The containment field began to glow with an ominous energy. The children instinctively moved closer together, some of the older ones protectively placing themselves in front of the younger ones. Even in the face of certain death, they displayed the same stubborn courage that had driven their species across the stars. "Stop this!" Sarah screamed at the hologram, as if her voice could somehow reach across the vast distances of space. Around the world, similar cries echoed in millions of homes. Parents who had children off-world were already frantically trying to contact them, only to find all communication channels blocked. In the council chamber, not a single alien voice rose in protest. They watched with the cold calculation of beings who had convinced themselves that this atrocity was not only justified, but necessary. The Galactic Council had grown comfortable in its role as the undisputed authority in their region of space. Humanity's rapid expansion and refusal to submit to their authority threatened that comfortable dominance. "Let this serve as a lesson," Kethvar continued. "Humanity will cease all expansion beyond the Sol system. You will abandon your colonies in the Centauri cluster, the Vega territories, and the Outer Rim settlements. You have 72 standard hours to begin full evacuation. Failure to comply will result in additional demonstrations of our resolve." The energy field around the children intensified. Jenny Morrison, the oldest at 16, stepped forward and looked directly into the camera. Her voice, somehow transmitted through the containment field, carried clearly across the broadcast. "My name is Jennifer Morrison," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I want my mom and dad to know that I love them. I want everyone to know that we're not afraid. We're humans, and humans don't give up. Ever. The other children joined her, their young voices creating a chorus that would haunt the galaxy's collective conscience for generations to come. They sang an old Earth song, one that their parents had taught them about hope and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Their voices remained strong even as the energy field reached critical levels. The execution was broadcast in real time across every communication network in known space. The Galactic Council wanted to ensure that no human, anywhere, could claim ignorance of what would happen if they continued their defiant expansion. When it was over, when the transparent chamber held nothing but empty air and fading energy signatures, Kethvar addressed the camera one final time. 71 hours and 57 minutes remain for humanity to begin compliance. The Council has spoken. The broadcast ended, leaving trillions of beings across the galaxy to process what they had just witnessed. On human worlds, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Rioting broke out on Mars. The lunar colonies declared martial law. The Outer Rim settlements went dark, cutting all communication with both Earth and the Council territories. But it was on Earth itself where the most significant reaction took place. In government buildings, military installations, and corporate headquarters, humanity's leaders gathered in emergency session. The veneer of civilization that had governed interstellar politics for centuries had been stripped away in a single, brutal moment. Admiral Sarah Rodriguez, the aging but still formidable head of Terran Defense Command, stood before the emergency assembly of the United Earth government. Her weathered face showed no emotion as she addressed the packed chamber. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years defending humanity against every threat the galaxy could throw at them. "We have just witnessed an act of war disguised as diplomacy. The Galactic Council has declared, through their actions, that they consider human children to be acceptable targets in their political games." The chamber erupted in angry voices, calls for immediate retaliation, demands for justice. Rodriguez waited for the noise to subside before continuing. "I have spent my entire career trying to find peaceful solutions to our conflicts with the Council. I believed that rational beings could find common ground, that diplomacy could bridge the gap between our species and theirs. I was wrong." She turned to activate a holographic display that showed the current disposition of human military forces across their territory. The numbers were sobering. Humanity was outnumbered nearly 50-1 in terms of ships, and the technological gap was significant. "However," Rodriguez continued, "the Council has made a critical error in judgment. They assume that because they have superior numbers and technology, they also have superior resolve. They are about to learn otherwise." In a secure facility beneath the Swiss Alps, another meeting was taking place. The individuals gathered in the sterile conference room bore no rank insignia, carried no official titles, and operated under names that appeared on no government roster. They were the shadows that moved behind humanity's expansion efforts, the ones who ensured that human colonies survived in a hostile galaxy through methods that would never appear in official reports. The man at the head of the table was known only as Constantine. His unremarkable appearance, average height, graying hair, forgettable features, had served him well in a career spanning 3 decades of covert operations. He had been responsible for the accidents that befell alien survey teams who discovered human colonies before they were ready to defend themselves. He had orchestrated the mining disasters that eliminated Council observation posts in disputed territories. He had made the hard choices that allowed humanity's expansion to continue despite overwhelming opposition. Now, as he reviewed the footage of the execution for the 10th time, Constantine's expression remained as calm and analytical as ever. But those who knew him well would have recognized the slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible tension in his shoulders. Constantine was a man who had dedicated his life to protecting human expansion through whatever means necessary. The Council had just made it very, very personal. "Recommendations?" he asked quietly. The woman across from him, known only as Nemesis, consulted her tablet. Standard protocol would be asymmetric warfare. Hit their supply lines, assassinate key figures, make the cost of occupation too high to sustain. Constantine shook his head. "This isn't about territory anymore. They killed children on live broadcast to make a political point. Standard protocols are insufficient." Another operative, a man whose scarred hands spoke of a more direct approach to problem solving, leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" Constantine was quiet for a long moment, studying the frozen image of Jenny Morrison's defiant face on the screen. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a finality that made the room's temperature seem to drop several degrees. "I'm suggesting we remind the galaxy why apex predators don't make good pets. The Council wants to play by new rules? Fine. But they're going to learn that humans wrote the book on those rules long before we ever left Earth." He turned to address the room. "Cancel all current operations, recall every asset, activate every sleeper, liquidate every account. As of this moment, we have one mission and one mission only. The Galactic Council has declared war on human children. We're going to show them what war with humanity really means." The meeting continued long into the night, but the broad strokes were clear. Humanity had been pushed too far, and their response would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Council had superior technology and numbers, but they had just awakened something far more dangerous: human creativity applied to the art of revenge. Meanwhile, in the Proxima system, Commander Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The Council had made their announcement expecting humanity to roll over, to accept their ultimatum and withdraw from the galaxy with their tails between their legs. Instead, they had awakened something that had been dormant in the human psyche, the same drive that had once motivated their ancestors to hunt mammoth with sharpened sticks, to cross oceans in wooden ships, to split atoms and walk on moons. Humanity had always been at their most dangerous when backed into a corner. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're receiving similar confirmations from all human military assets. No one is withdrawing. The civilian evacuation ships are being recalled. All colonies are declaring their intent to resist." Marcus nodded, though his thoughts were with Sarah and Maya back on Earth. By the time this was over, his daughter might not have a father to come home to, but if he didn't act now, she might not have a future at all. "Signal to all ships," he ordered. "Battle stations. The Council wanted to teach humanity a lesson. Time to show them that the student has become the teacher." As the broadcast's implications rippled across human space, one thing became crystal clear. The Galactic Council had intended their demonstration to break humanity's spirit, to show them the futility of resistance against overwhelming odds. Instead, they had just given humanity a reason to show the galaxy exactly why Earth's apex predator had never learned to yield. The war was about to begin.